Jacob Wren wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead and squinted into the horizon. Therox 5 was a planet of contrasts. Verdant jungles stretched for miles, interrupted by jagged obsidian mountains that pierced the sky like blackened teeth. Yet, for all its untamed beauty, the planet was as unpredictable as a cat in a room full of laser pointers. One moment, it was serene. The next, it seemed eager to kill you with carnivorous plants or swarms of buzzing creatures that looked like oversized dragonflies armed with pincers. He adjusted the straps of his field pack, heavy with samples of alien flora, and sighed. Just one more scan, he muttered to himself. He held up a small, disc-shaped device that hummed faintly as it analyzed the surrounding environment. Its screen flickered with streams of alien glyphs and the occasional frustrated beep. Yeah, I get it, Jacob grumbled. Therox V is dangerous. You've made your point. The scanner whirred in apparent defiance, its display blinking red as it detected movement nearby. Jacob froze. His eyes darted toward the dense underbrush ahead, where something, or someone, was approaching. The bushes rustled with a rhythm too deliberate to be the wind, and his hand instinctively moved to the small stun rod clipped to his belt. Before he could draw it, the foliage parted, and she stepped into view. She was unlike anything Jacob had ever seen. Her skin shimmered with a pearlescent glow, shifting through hues of green, blue, and gold with each step she took. Her eyes, large and luminous, seemed to hold galaxies within them, and her hair, or was it some sort of tendril-like extension, flowed like liquid silver. She stood taller than him by at least a head, her presence both commanding and strangely serene. Jacob opened his mouth to speak, but the alien woman beat him to it. Her voice was melodic yet firm, carrying a sense of gravity that made his stomach twist. "I owe you a life, human," she said, her gaze locking onto his. Jacob blinked, certain he'd misheard her. Come again?" "You saved me," she continued, gesturing toward the distant jungle. "Earlier, when you startled the predator stalking me. Had you not been there, I would have perished." Jacob's mind raced. Predator? He vaguely recalled tossing a rock into the bushes a few hours ago when he'd heard an unsettling growl. It had seemed like the safest way to avoid becoming lunch. "Oh," he said, scratching the back of his neck. That was just instinct. Really, you don't owe me anything." The alien woman stepped closer, her expression unyielding. "Your customs may differ from mine, but among my people, a life saved is a debt owed. I am bound to serve you until I have repaid this debt in full." Jacob's brow furrowed. "Serve me? Look, that's really not necessary. I'm just a botanist, not some intergalactic hero. You don't have to—" "Your modesty is irrelevant," she interrupted, her tone bordering on amused. "My name is Kalen of the Jiren, and I will fulfill my duty." Jacob stared at her, his mind juggling disbelief and mild panic. "Kalen, I appreciate the sentiment, but this arrangement sounds a little non-negotiable," she finished for him, crossing her arms in a way that made it clear the conversation was over. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Well, this is awkward." By the time they reached his small research outpost, Jacob had resigned himself to his newfound companion. Kalen followed him with the precision of a shadow, her gaze sweeping their surroundings as if anticipating an ambush at any moment. "Just so we're clear," Jacob said as they entered the outpost, "I don't actually need a bodyguard. Therox 5 isn't that dangerous if you know what you're doing." As if on cue, a plant by the entrance snapped its carnivorous jaws inches from his arm, earning a sharp glare from Kalen. "Noted," he muttered, edging away from the plant. Inside, Kalen inspected the cramped interior with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. The walls were lined with shelves overflowing with botanical samples, data pads, and half-finished equipment. A small kitchenette occupied one corner, its counter littered with empty ration packets. Kalen raised an eyebrow at the mess. "Is this your dwelling?" Jacob chuckled nervously. I prefer the term temporary workspace. She tilted her head, her expression unreadable. It appears structurally unsound. Hey, it's held up so far, he said defensively. Besides, it's not like I'm entertaining guests. Kaylin's gaze flicked to him, and for a moment, he thought he saw the corner of her mouth twitch upward. A hint of a smile, perhaps. Over the next few hours, Jacob tried to go about his work, cataloging samples and analyzing data. Kaylin, however, seemed determined to insert herself into every aspect of his routine. "What are you doing now?" she asked, peering over his shoulder as he examined a strange luminescent moss under a microscope. "Science," he replied, his tone dry. "Is it dangerous?" Jacob rolled his eyes. "Only if it suddenly grows teeth." Kaylin frowned. "That is within the realm of possibility on this planet." He sighed. "Okay, fair point, but trust me, this moss is harmless. You can relax." She didn't move, her intense gaze fixed on the moss as if daring it to misbehave. By evening, Jacob was both exhausted and mildly exasperated. He sat at the tiny dining table poking at a ration bar while Kaylin stood by the door like a sentinel. "You know," he said, "you don't have to stand there all night. This place is secure enough." She arched an elegant brow. "And if it isn't? Then I'll let you say, 'I told you so,'" he quipped. Her lips twitched again, but she quickly masked the expression with a stoic nod. For the first time since her abrupt arrival, Jacob allowed himself a small smile. Perhaps having a Xiran warrior watching his back wouldn't be so bad after all, assuming they could survive each other's company. The morning on Therox 5 began with a sound Jacob had come to dread, a loud crash from the direction of his workstation. Groaning, he rolled out of his cot, threw on a utility jacket, and stumbled toward the commotion. What greeted him was a scene of organized chaos. Kaylin stood amidst a pile of dismantled equipment, her expression calm but determined. The components of his environmental scanner, his most vital tool for cataloging the planet's flora, were spread across the table like pieces of an alien jigsaw puzzle. "Kaylin," Jacob began, pinching the bridge of his nose. "What exactly are you doing?" She looked up, her silvery hair catching the light like liquid metal. "Improving your inefficient tools. This device was operating at only 62% capacity." "It was also operating," Jacob retorted, gesturing to the now gutted scanner. Kaylin's brow furrowed, her voice as serene as ever. "Your gratitude is not required. My debt compels me to enhance your survival prospects." He let out a deep sigh, pulling out a stool and sitting down. "Okay, first of all, I appreciate the sentiment. Second, I really need that scanner in one piece." "It will be reassembled shortly," she assured him, returning to her work. "Define shortly," Jacob muttered under his breath. By midday, the scanner was back together and, to Jacob's surprise, functioning better than ever. Kaylin, however, was undeterred in her quest to optimize his life. Her next project, reorganizing his supplies. "This is an unacceptable system," she declared, holding up a jar of luminescent spores that had been precariously balanced atop a stack of data pads. Jacob crossed his arms. "Unacceptable to who?" "To anyone who values efficiency," she replied, setting the jar down with meticulous care. "Okay, but I have a system. It's called organized chaos." Kaylin paused, clearly unamused. "Chaos is not an acceptable system." "It works for me," he said with a shrug. "Does it?" she countered, holding up a shattered test tube. Jacob winced. "Fine, but just don't touch my coffee stash." She raised an eyebrow. "Coffee?" "The elixir of life," Jacob replied dramatically, earning a rare flicker of confusion from Kaylin. "I was not aware humans consumed elixirs," she said, her voice serious. Jacob smirked. "It's not actually an elixir. It's, you know what? Never mind. Just don't touch it." Despite their differences, Jacob found himself oddly enjoying Kaylin's company. Her blunt, no-nonsense demeanor was both frustrating and oddly endearing, and her complete lack of familiarity with human customs led to no shortage of comedic moments. Case in point, lunch. Kaylin had insisted on preparing a meal, claiming it was her duty to ensure Jacob's sustenance. What followed was a culinary experiment that could generously be described as catastrophic. "This is what, exactly?" Jacob asked, staring at the unidentifiable lump on his plate. "A fusion of local ingredients and human dietary staples," Kaylin replied, her tone bordering on proud. Jacob poked the lump with his fork. It jiggled ominously. "And you're sure it's edible?" "It is nutritionally sufficient," she said. "That's not the same thing," Jacob muttered. With great trepidation, he took a bite. The taste was indescribable, a mix of bitter, tangy, and something that could only be classified as alien. He coughed, reaching for his canteen. Kaylin frowned. "Is it unsatisfactory?" "Let's just say it's an acquired taste," Jacob replied diplomatically. Kaylin studied him for a moment before nodding. "I will improve." The day continued with more adjustments to Jacob's routine, each met with a mix of amusement and exasperation. Kaylin's dedication was unwavering, but her interpretations of his needs were hilariously off the mark. When he mentioned feeling stiff from crouching over samples, she offered to train him in Jiren combat stances, demonstrating a series of intricate movements that left Jacob gasping for air after 5 minutes. "You are lacking in stamina," she observed. "Thanks for the pep talk," Jacob wheezed. As the sun set over Therox 5, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold, Jacob and Kaylin found themselves sitting outside the outpost. The air was cool and filled with the hum of alien insects, and the twin moons cast a gentle glow over the landscape. "You know," Jacob began, "for someone so serious, you're surprisingly entertaining." Kaylin tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "Entertaining?" "Yeah," he said with a grin. "I mean, your cooking might be lethal, but your company isn't half bad." Her lips twitched, and for a moment, he thought she might actually smile. "I find your humor peculiar," she admitted. Jacob laughed. "Get used to it. Humans use humor to cope with just about everything." Kaylin considered this. "Perhaps I will study it further." "Well, you've got a good teacher," Jacob said, leaning back and staring up at the stars. For the first time since her abrupt arrival, Kaylin allowed herself to relax, the faintest hint of a smile gracing her features. The night stretched on, and while their journey together had only just begun, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that it was the start of something extraordinary. Morning on Therox 5 came with an odd mixture of tranquility and foreboding. The jungle's symphony was a blend of chirps, hums, and distant growls, a constant reminder that life on this planet was as diverse as it was dangerous. Jacob Wren, however, had grown used to the peculiar soundtrack. What he hadn't grown used to was his new companion, Kaylin, who was already outside inspecting a piece of alien technology she had produced from seemingly nowhere. "Do Zyran warriors always wake up at the crack of dawn to fiddle with gadgets?" Jacob asked, stepping out of the outpost while sipping a steaming cup of coffee. Kaylin glanced up, her luminous eyes catching the sunlight. "This device is not mere fiddling. It is a vital tool for detecting subspace anomalies." Jacob blinked. "Subspace anomalies? Please tell me you're joking." "I do not joke about anomalies," Kaylin said, her tone deadpan. "Of course you don't," Jacob muttered, setting his coffee down on a flat rock. Kaylin's anomaly detector, as Jacob had started calling it, emitted a series of melodic beeps, drawing her attention. She crouched low, her movements graceful yet deliberate, as the device projected a holographic map of the surrounding area. "What's that?" Jacob asked, leaning closer. Kaylin tapped a glowing marker on the map. "A disturbance, approximately 2 kilometers from here." Jacob frowned. Disturbance? You mean like an earthquake? Unlikely. The readings suggest an artificial origin. That caught Jacob's attention. Artificial? As in, someone built something out here? Kaylin nodded. Perhaps. It warrants investigation. Jacob hesitated. The thought of trekking deeper into the jungle to investigate an unknown disturbance wasn't exactly appealing, but his curiosity won out. Fine. But if we run into any more of those carnivorous vines, I'm blaming you. Kaylin's lips twitched, the closest thing to a smile he'd seen from her yet. Understood. The journey through the jungle was an exercise in patience and vigilance. Kaylin led the way, her keen senses attuned to every rustle and shadow, while Jacob trailed behind, occasionally tripping over roots or swatting at oversized insects. You know, Jacob said, pausing to catch his breath, if this whole warrior thing doesn't work out, you'd make an excellent tour guide. Kaylin didn't look back. I doubt there is much demand for jungle tours on Therox 5. Jacob smirked. Well, you never know. Maybe I'll start a business. Jacob's Jungle Adventures. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Kaylin glanced over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. Humor is your defense mechanism. Among other things, Jacob replied with a shrug. As they approached the source of the disturbance, the jungle began to change. The foliage grew denser, the air heavier, and the sounds of wildlife faded into an eerie silence. Jacob felt a knot of unease in his stomach. This doesn't feel right, he murmured. Kaylin held up a hand, signaling for him to stop. We are close. The anomaly detector emitted a sharp, continuous tone. Kaylin crouched low, scanning the area with her luminous gaze. Jacob followed suit, though his crouch was less graceful and more of an awkward squat. Ahead, the jungle opened into a small clearing. In the center stood a towering structure that seemed to grow out of the ground itself. Its surface was smooth and black, reflecting the dim light like polished obsidian. Strange symbols pulsed faintly across its surface, their patterns shifting in a hypnotic dance. What is that? Jacob whispered. Kaylin's eyes narrowed. Xeran architecture, but altered. Altered? She nodded. The design is familiar, yet these symbols are not of my people. This structure has been tampered with. Jacob stepped closer, his curiosity overriding his caution. The air around the structure felt charged, like standing near a thunderstorm. Could it be abandoned? Kaylin's response was cut short as the symbols on the structure flared brightly and a low hum filled the clearing. Jacob stumbled back, his heart racing. Please tell me that's normal, he said. Kaylin didn't answer. She was already moving, her body tense and ready. Stay behind me. Not a problem, Jacob muttered, retreating a few steps. The hum grew louder, and the ground beneath them began to tremble. Then, with a sound like cracking ice, the surface of the structure split open, revealing a glowing core of swirling blue energy. Jacob's mouth went dry. That's probably not a good sign. Kaylin drew a sleek crystalline blade from a compartment on her armor. Remain vigilant. Vigilant? I was hoping for run like crazy, Jacob quipped, though his hands clenched into fists. The energy from the structure coalesced into a sphere, floating several feet above the ground. It pulsed rhythmically, as if alive. Kaylin stepped forward cautiously, her weapon at the ready. Wait, Jacob called, but Kaylin didn't stop. She reached out a hand, her fingers brushing the edge of the sphere. It responded instantly, expanding outward in a blinding flash of light. Jacob shielded his eyes, stumbling back. When the light faded, the clearing was eerily silent. The sphere had vanished, but the structure remained, its symbols now dark. Kaylin stood in the same spot, her expression unreadable. What just happened? Jacob asked, approaching cautiously. Kaylin turned to him, her gaze intense. We must leave. Now. Jacob didn't argue. As they made their way back to the outpost, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Kaylin was quieter than usual, her focus inward as if processing what had transpired. "Care to fill me in?" he asked finally. Kaylin hesitated before speaking. "That energy, it was not of this world. It was not of any world I know." Jacob frowned. "So, alien to the aliens? Great. That's comforting." Kaylin's lips twitched ever so slightly. "Your humor is misplaced, but appreciated." "Well, glad to know I'm good for something," Jacob said with a grin, though his thoughts were far from light-hearted. Whatever they had encountered in the jungle, Jacob knew it was just the beginning. And as much as he hated to admit it, he was both terrified and exhilarated by the prospect of what lay ahead. The hours following their encounter with the mysterious structure passed in uneasy silence. Kaylin immersed herself in recalibrating her anomaly detector, her usually calm demeanor replaced by a quiet intensity. Jacob, on the other hand, paced the outpost, his nerves frayed by the day's events. "I don't suppose you've got a manual for ancient glowing spheres that try to blind people?" he asked, breaking the silence. Kaylin didn't look up. "If such a manual existed, it would be in Zirin archives. Unfortunately, I am not carrying those." Jacob smirked, though his humor was laced with unease. "Yeah, because that would have been way too convenient." Kaylin finally glanced at him, her expression softening just slightly. "You are unsettled." "Understatement of the year," Jacob replied, leaning against the table. "That thing, whatever it was, felt alive. And I don't mean in the it's just energy kind of way. It felt aware." Kaylin considered this, her fingers pausing over the device. "It is possible. The structure bore traces of Zirin craftsmanship, but the energy we encountered was unlike anything I have ever seen. It could be sentient." Jacob stared at her. "Sentient energy? Great. Just what we needed." Despite the tension, Jacob couldn't help but notice how seamlessly Kaylin had integrated herself into his daily life. She moved through the outpost with an efficiency that left him both impressed and slightly annoyed. "Do you ever relax?" he asked one evening as she meticulously cleaned her weapon. Kaylin raised an eyebrow. "Relaxation is unnecessary. My focus must remain sharp." Jacob chuckled. "You sound like a motivational poster. Stay focused, stay sharp, stay Zirin." Her lips twitched, and for a moment he thought she might actually laugh. "You find humor in peculiar things." "It's a gift," Jacob replied, taking a sip of coffee. "You should try it sometime." Kaylin tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps I will." The following day, the anomaly detector lit up again, its melodic beeps interrupting their morning routine. Kaylin studied the display with a furrowed brow, her body tense. "What is it this time?" Jacob asked, already pulling on his boots. "Another disturbance," Kaylin replied. "This one is closer." "Closer?" Jacob echoed, his stomach tightening. "How close?" Kaylin gestured to the map. "Approximately 500 meters northwest." Jacob sighed. "Of course it is, because why would the universe ever give us a break?" The trek to the new disturbance site was shorter, but no less nerve-wracking. The jungle seemed to close in around them, its dense foliage casting long shadows that danced in the dappled sunlight. "This place gets creepier by the day," Jacob muttered, swatting at a particularly persistent insect. Kaylin's gaze remained fixed ahead. "The jungle is alive in more ways than one. It is wise to remain cautious." "Thanks for the pep talk," Jacob said dryly. When they reached the site, they found another structure, though this one was smaller and partially buried beneath the jungle's growth. Its surface was cracked, and the symbols that adorned it were faint, flickering like dying embers. "Looks like it's seen better days," Jacob observed. Kaylin approached the structure, her movements cautious. She ran her hand along the surface, her expression unreadable. "This is older than the first. Much older." Jacob crouched beside her, examining the faint symbols. "Do they mean anything to you?" Kaylin shook her head. "The patterns are unfamiliar. They do not align with Ziran design." Before Jacob could respond, the ground beneath them trembled, and the symbols flared to life. Both he and Kaylin scrambled back as a low hum filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. "Not this again," Jacob muttered, his heart racing. Kaylin's hand went to her weapon, her body tense. "Be ready." "For what?" Jacob asked, though he doubted she had an answer. The structure emitted a beam of light that shot skyward, piercing through the jungle canopy. Jacob shielded his eyes, squinting at the sudden brilliance. "Is it calling something?" he asked, his voice tight with unease. Kaylin didn't respond. Her focus was on the beam, her sharp gaze searching for any sign of danger. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the beam vanished, leaving the clearing eerily silent. The structure's symbols dimmed, their light fading into darkness. "Well, that was anticlimactic," Jacob said, though his relief was short-lived. Kaylin straightened, her expression grim. "We are being watched." Jacob froze. "Watched? By what?" Kaylin's gaze darted to the shadows at the edge of the clearing. "I do not know, but we are not alone." The return to the outpost was tense. Kaylin's movements were swift and deliberate, her weapon at the ready. Jacob, on the other hand, couldn't shake the feeling of unseen eyes following them. "Do you think it's connected to the structure?" he asked as they approached the safety of the outpost. "It is possible," Kaylin replied, "but we cannot be certain until we gather more information." Jacob sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Great. So now we're playing hide-and-seek with an invisible stalker. Just another day on Therox 5. Kaylin's lips twitched again, a fleeting hint of amusement. "Your ability to find humor in dire situations is commendable." "Yeah, well, it's that or have a breakdown," Jacob replied with a grin. And that night, as they sat around a small fire outside the outpost, Jacob couldn't help but feel a growing sense of camaraderie with Kaylin. Despite their differences, they were becoming a team, united by the strange and dangerous world they found themselves in. "You know," Jacob said, staring into the flames, "for a warrior bound by some cosmic debt, you're not half bad company." Kaylin tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "And you, for a human scientist, are tolerable." Jacob laughed. "High praise. I'll take it." Kaylin allowed herself a small smile, and for the first time since their meeting, the tension between them eased. As the fire crackled and the jungle hummed in the background, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that whatever mysteries Therox 5 held, they were only just beginning to unravel. The morning on Therox 5 began with a disconcerting quiet. The usual symphony of jungle life was muted, as if the ecosystem itself was holding its breath. Jacob Wren, sitting on the steps of the outpost with a half-finished cup of coffee, couldn't help but feel the weight of the silence pressing down on him. "You notice that?" he asked as Kaylin approached, her boots crunching softly against the dirt. Kaylin tilted her head, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the surrounding jungle. "The wildlife has gone silent. This is unusual." Jacob grimaced. "Unusual is starting to feel like the default setting around here." Kaylin didn't respond. Instead, she adjusted her anomaly detector, which emitted a soft hum as it powered on. Jacob stood and peered over her shoulder, his curiosity outweighing his apprehension. "Anything new?" he asked. Kaylin tapped a section of the holographic map that appeared above the device. "There are faint energy signatures radiating outward from the structure we encountered yesterday. They appear to be spreading." "Spreading?" Jacob repeated, his stomach tightening. "Like a ripple in a pond?" Kaylin nodded. "Precisely. And the ripples are accelerating." Jacob ran a hand through his hair. I don't like the sound of that. Neither do I, Kalen replied. Despite his misgivings, Jacob couldn't deny a certain thrill at the thought of uncovering more mysteries. So, what's the plan? Do we follow the ripples? Kalen turned to him, her gaze steady. We must understand their source and purpose. The nearest point of disturbance is 1.2 kilometers east. Jacob sighed, already reaching for his gear. Of course it is. Lead the way, fearless warrior. Kalen raised an eyebrow but said nothing, her lips curving into what Jacob could only describe as the faintest hint of amusement. The trek eastward was uneventful at first, though the jungle's stillness kept Jacob on edge. Every step felt like it might disturb some unseen force lurking just beyond the shadows. Tell me, Kalen, Jacob said, attempting to lighten the mood. Do Zirans have a word for creeped out? Kalen glanced at him. Our language has terms for fear and unease, but I do not believe we have an exact equivalent for creeped out. Jacob smirked. Well, you're missing out. It's a very versatile phrase. Kalen's expression remained neutral, but Jacob thought he saw a flicker of understanding in her eyes. You rely on humor to mask your apprehension. Busted, Jacob admitted with a grin. But hey, it works. As they neared the disturbance site, the jungle began to change. The trees grew thinner, their twisted branches giving way to open ground littered with strange crystalline formations. The crystals glowed faintly, casting an otherworldly light over the area. Jacob crouched beside one of the formations, his scientific instincts kicking in. These weren't here yesterday. They must have grown overnight. Kalen studied the crystals, her expression guarded. The energy signatures are stronger here. These formations may be a physical manifestation of the disturbance. Jacob reached out to touch one of the crystals, but Kalen grabbed his wrist, stopping him. Do not touch it, she warned. Jacob blinked. Why not? Kalen's gaze hardened. We do not know how it will react to human contact. Fair point, Jacob said, pulling his hand back. Thanks for the save. Kalen nodded, releasing his wrist. Your curiosity is commendable, but it must be tempered with caution. Story of my life, Jacob muttered, though he couldn't help but feel a twinge of gratitude for her vigilance. The anomaly detector beeped, drawing their attention to a cluster of larger crystals at the center of the clearing. Kalen approached them cautiously, her weapon at the ready. Jacob followed, his own tension rising despite his attempts at levity. The largest crystal emitted a low hum, its glow pulsating in time with the ripples on Kalen's device. As they drew closer, the hum grew louder, resonating in Jacob's chest like the deep notes of an organ. This feels significant, Jacob said, his voice barely audible over the sound. Kalen nodded. The energy here is concentrated. This may be the origin of the ripples. Jacob frowned. But what's causing it? Before Kalen could answer, the crystal emitted a burst of light and a holographic image appeared above it. The image was fragmented, like a broken mirror, but it was unmistakably a figure. Jacob's breath caught. Is that a person? Kalen's eyes widened, the first genuine display of surprise Jacob had seen from her. It appears to be a projection, but it is incomplete. The fragmented figure spoke, its voice distorted but unmistakably alien. The words were incomprehensible, but the tone carried a sense of urgency. Kalen stepped forward, her brow furrowing as she listened. This language, it is ancient, older than Ziran dialects. Jacob squinted at the projection. Can you understand any of it? Kalen shook her head. Only fragments. It speaks of a warning. A great danger. Jacob felt a chill run down his spine. A danger to us, or to whatever left this here? Kalen's expression darkened. I do not know. The projection flickered and faded, leaving the clearing in silence once more. Jacob exhaled, his hands shaking. Well, that was unnerving. Kaylin turned to him, her gaze steady but troubled. This confirms that the disturbances are not natural. They are a warning, perhaps even a plea for help. Jacob ran a hand through his hair. A plea for help from who? Or what? Kaylin didn't answer. Her focus was already on the anomaly detector, which was now emitting a new series of beeps. What is it? Jacob asked. Kaylin's expression was unreadable. The ripples have intensified, and they are spreading faster. Jacob swallowed hard. So what do we do? Kaylin's gaze met his, her eyes filled with determination. We find the source, and we stop it. Jacob nodded, though his unease remained. Whatever lay ahead, he knew there was no turning back. For better or worse, their journey was just beginning. The jungle canopy stretched overhead, a web of leaves filtering the sunlight into beams that danced on the forest floor. Jacob walked a few paces behind Kaylin, his thoughts a chaotic swirl. The projection's warning played on a loop in his mind. Though he hadn't understood the alien words, the urgency in its voice had been unmistakable. Kaylin's focus was unwavering as she led the way, her anomaly detector guiding their steps deeper into Therox Fee's heart. Her movements were precise, her gaze scanning their surroundings for any signs of danger. Do you ever get tired of being so composed? Jacob asked, breaking the silence. Kaylin glanced back at him, her expression unreadable. Composure is necessary. Panic serves no purpose. Jacob smirked. Well, excuse me for being human. We tend to panic as a hobby. Kaylin raised an eyebrow. A peculiar hobby. Jacob chuckled. You'd be surprised how much it helps in moderation. Keeps the adrenaline flowing. Kaylin didn't respond, but the faint twitch of her lips suggested she might have found his comment amusing. The anomaly detector's beeping grew louder as they approached a new clearing. Here, the jungle gave way to a jagged rock formation that jutted from the ground like the spine of some ancient creature. At its center was another crystalline structure, larger than the ones they had encountered before. This is it, Kaylin said, her voice low. Jacob studied the formation, unease prickling at the back of his neck. Why do I get the feeling that touching that thing will end badly? Kaylin didn't answer immediately. Instead, she approached the structure with deliberate caution, her hand resting on the hilt of her weapon. Jacob, she said, her tone serious. Stay close. If anything happens, do not act recklessly. Reckless? Me? Jacob feigned innocence, though his attempt at humor couldn't mask his nervousness. Kaylin shot him a sidelong glance. Precisely. The structure pulsed with a rhythm that seemed to echo the beating of a heart. As they drew closer, its surface shimmered, revealing patterns that shifted and flowed like liquid. Okay, that's definitely not normal, Jacob said, his voice barely above a whisper. Kaylin studied the patterns, her expression thoughtful. This is not Xeran technology. It is far older and more advanced. Jacob crouched beside her, his curiosity overcoming his fear. Any guesses on who built it? Kaylin shook her head. Not yet, but the energy it emits is extraordinary. It may be a power source, or a gateway. Jacob's eyes widened. A gateway? You mean like a portal? It is possible, Kaylin replied, but without further data I cannot be certain. Jacob exhaled slowly. Great. So we're poking around an alien gateway with no idea what's on the other side. What could possibly go wrong? As Kaylin adjusted her detector, the structure emitted a low hum, and the patterns on its surface intensified. Jacob took a step back, his instincts screaming at him to run. Kaylin? It's doing something. I see it, she replied, her tone calm. The hum grew louder, and the air around them seemed to vibrate. Jacob felt a pressure building in his chest, as if the structure was drawing energy from its surroundings, and from them. Kaylin, this doesn't feel safe, Jacob said, his voice tight. Kaylin's gaze remained fixed on the structure. We must observe. If this is a gateway, we need to understand its function. Before Jacob could argue, the structure emitted a burst of light, and a swirling vortex appeared above it. The vortex shimmered with colors Jacob had no name for, its edges crackling with energy. "That's definitely a portal," Jacob said, his voice tinged with awe and fear. Kalen nodded. "It appears so. But to where?" And the vortex stabilized, and an image began to take shape within its depths. At first, it was indistinct, a blur of motion and light. But as the image clarified, Jacob felt a chill run down his spine. The portal showed a landscape unlike anything he had ever seen. Towering spires of crystal rose from an endless expanse of water, their surfaces reflecting a sky filled with swirling clouds of gold and silver. Kalen's expression was unreadable, but Jacob could sense her unease. "Do you recognize it?" he asked. "No," she replied, "but it is beautiful and dangerous." Jacob nodded. "Yeah, I'm getting that vibe too." Suddenly, the vortex flickered and the image shifted. A figure appeared, its form obscured by a cloak of shimmering light. Its voice echoed from the portal, the same distorted tones they had heard before. Kalen stepped forward, her gaze intense. "Identify yourself." The figure's response was unintelligible, but its tone carried an urgency that made Jacob's skin crawl. "I don't think it's here for small talk," Jacob muttered. Kalen didn't take her eyes off the figure. "It is warning us. The energy in this area is unstable." Jacob frowned. "Unstable how?" Before Kalen could answer, the portal began to collapse, its edges fracturing like glass. The ground beneath them trembled, and the structure emitted a high-pitched whine. "Jacob, move!" Kalen shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him back. They dove for cover as the structure exploded in a shower of light and sound. When the chaos subsided, the clearing was eerily quiet once more. Jacob sat up, coughing as he waved away the dust. "Well, that was fun. Let's never do it again." Kalen ignored his sarcasm, her focus on the remains of the structure. The portal was incomplete. It could not sustain itself. Jacob groaned, brushing dirt off his jacket. So what now? Do we just wait for the next mysterious alien artifact to explode in our faces? Kalen stood, her expression resolute. We must continue. The warnings are clear. Something is coming. We must be prepared." Jacob sighed, climbing to his feet. "You know, for someone who owes me a life debt, you sure have a knack for dragging me into dangerous situations." Kalen allowed herself a faint smile. "Consider it a testament to your resilience." Jacob laughed despite himself. "Yeah, resilience. Let's go with that." As they began their journey back to the outpost, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that their encounter with the portal was only the beginning. Whatever lay ahead, it was far bigger than either of them had imagined. The journey back to the outpost felt heavier than the trek out. The jungle's oppressive quiet remained, as if the world itself held its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. Jacob walked alongside Kalen, their steps in sync, yet their thoughts worlds apart. For Jacob, the events of the past days played on a loop in his mind. The alien projections, the collapsing portal, the unspoken warnings. He glanced at Kalen, who seemed as composed as ever, her features stoic in the dim jungle light. He envied her calmness, but knew it wasn't apathy. It was resolve. "You know," Jacob began, breaking the silence, "if I survive all this, I'm adding alien portal exploder to my resume." Kalen glanced at him, one eyebrow raised. "Do humans often use humor to process traumatic experiences?" "Constantly," Jacob replied. "We're very advanced in that department. In fact, I think it might be our greatest evolutionary achievement." Kalen allowed herself a faint smile. "Then perhaps it is your species' greatest strength." "Comedy?" Jacob asked, pretending to look offended. I don't know. Intelligence or adaptability?" Kalen's smile widened ever so slightly. Intelligence is not exclusive to your species, but your humor is unique. Jacob chuckled. Well, I'll take that as a compliment. When they reached the outpost, it was dusk, and the jungle's shadows stretched long across the ground. Jacob was relieved to see the familiar silhouette of the small building, its solar panels gleaming faintly in the fading light. But the relief was short-lived. The outpost's main console blinked with an alert. Kaylin moved quickly to access the data, her fingers flying over the interface. Jacob stood behind her, watching the holographic display come to life. "What's it saying?" Jacob asked, peering over her shoulder. Kaylin frowned. "The energy disturbances have intensified. The ripples are no longer isolated to this region. They're spreading across the planet." Jacob's stomach dropped. "So, what does that mean? Are we looking at a planetary meltdown?" Kaylin's gaze was steady. "Not a meltdown, but something ancient is awakening. The structures we encountered were part of a larger network, a network designed to protect this planet." Jacob blinked. "Protect it from what?" Kaylin hesitated. "From invaders, from destruction. The network was meant to shield the planet, but it has been dormant for millennia, and now it is reactivating. The process is unstable." "Unstable how?" Jacob asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Kaylin turned to face him, her expression somber. "If we cannot stabilize the network, it could collapse. The resulting energy release would devastate the planet." Jacob exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. "No pressure, then." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Kaylin worked tirelessly to decipher the ancient data from the structures they had encountered, her movements precise and methodical. Jacob did his best to help, though he often felt like a child trying to assist a master artist. "So, what's the plan?" he asked, handing her another data module. Kaylin inserted the module into the console, her expression focused. "We need to reactivate the stabilizers within the network. There are 3 key points scattered across the region. If we can synchronize them, the system will stabilize." 3 points, Jacob repeated. "That's manageable, right?" Kaylin didn't respond immediately. "It depends on whether the network will allow us to access them. It is ancient, and its systems may perceive us as a threat." "Fantastic," Jacob said, clapping his hands together. "Nothing like being mistaken for a hostile invader by an ancient alien defense system." And their first stop was a monolithic structure buried beneath the jungle canopy. Unlike the crystalline formations they had seen before, this structure was metallic, its surface etched with glowing patterns that pulsed faintly. Kaylin approached it cautiously, her anomaly detector humming in her hand. "The stabilizer's core is within. We must access it." Jacob followed, his heart pounding. "Access it how? Do we knock?" Kaylin gave him a look. "Not quite. The system requires an energy input to unlock the core." "Great," Jacob said. "Do you happen to have an ancient alien power converter lying around?" Kaylin didn't answer. Instead, she placed her hand on the structure, her fingers glowing faintly as her Zyran physiology interacted with the alien technology. The structure responded, its surface shifting to reveal a doorway. "Okay, that's cool," Jacob admitted. Kaylin stepped inside, and Jacob followed, his flashlight cutting through the dim interior. The air was thick with the hum of dormant machinery, and the walls glowed faintly with the same shifting patterns. "Stay close," Kaylin said, her voice low. Jacob smirked. "Don't worry, I'm not exactly eager to get lost in an alien labyrinth." And they reached the stabilizer core, a massive crystalline sphere suspended in midair. Kaylin approached it, her movements deliberate. "This is the core," she said. "It must be realigned." Jacob scratched his head. "Realigned how? Is there a manual?" Kaylin didn't respond. Instead, she activated her anomaly detector, which projected a series of holographic symbols around the core. Jacob peered at the symbols, his brow furrowing. "I don't suppose one of those says on-off switch, does it?" Kaylin shot him a look. "Not quite. She worked quickly, her fingers manipulating the holographic controls. The core responded, its glow intensifying as the symbols aligned. The structure trembled, and the hum of machinery grew louder. "Is that supposed to happen?" Jacob asked, his voice rising. "Yes," Kaylin replied, her tone calm. "The core is stabilizing." The trembling subsided, and the core's glow became steady. Kaylin exhaled, a rare moment of relief crossing her features. "One down," Jacob said, grinning. "Two to go." The remaining two stabilizers were more challenging, each presenting unique obstacles. One required navigating a series of shifting platforms over a chasm, during which Jacob discovered he was not fond of heights. "Next time I'm bringing a grappling hook," he muttered, clinging to the edge of a platform. Kaylin glanced back at him. "You are surprisingly agile for someone who complains so much." "Flattery will get you everywhere," Jacob replied, though his grip tightened. Despite the challenges, they managed to stabilize the remaining cores. By the time they returned to the outpost, the jungle seemed to breathe easier, its life gradually returning to normal. As they stood outside the outpost, watching the sun rise over the horizon, Jacob felt an unfamiliar sense of accomplishment. "Well," he said, breaking the silence, "I guess that's one way to spend a week." Kaylin turned to him, her expression soft. "You have proven yourself resourceful, Jacob Wren, perhaps more than you realize." Jacob smirked. "Careful, Kaylin. You're starting to sound like you like me." Kaylin didn't respond, but her faint smile spoke volumes. For the first time, Jacob felt a connection to this strange planet, and to the alien woman who had turned his life upside down. "Think the universe will let us rest for a while?" he asked. Kaylin's gaze turned to the horizon. "Perhaps, but if it does not, we will face it together." Jacob nodded, his smile widening. "I'll hold you to that." And as the sun bathed Therox 5 in golden light, Jacob Wren and Kaylin stood side by side, ready to face whatever the universe had in store.